Started formally. Welcome and good afternoon. I'm Marya Besharov. I'm Professor of Organizations and Impact here at Said Business School. I'm also the Academic Director of the School Center for Social Entrepreneurship. And I'm really happy to welcome you all here today for the Insights for Action seminar. This is a seminar series that explores how researchers and practitioners are using research insights for action in Oxford, but also well beyond Oxford. And today in the seminar, we're going to talk about well-being and wellness in the social impact sector. What is the current state of play? Why is well-being so essential for sustaining social impact work? And what is the role of leaders in particular in fostering greater well-being for themselves and for the sector as a whole? I'm joined in this conversation by three fantastic panelists. I'll introduce each of them in turn. Dr. Adaku Agwunobi is an academic researcher focused on the health and well-being of health entrepreneurs, both in the UK and in Nigeria. She's also the founder of Hair Goals, which is a tech-savvy natural hair and wellness social enterprise. And she's an early career research fellow at the school. Dr. Laurence Wainwright is the course director for the MSc in Sustainability, Enterprise and Environment, and a departmental lecturer in the Smith School for Enterprise and Environment here at the University of Oxford. Laurence is also an early career research fellow with us here at the school. So welcome to both of you. And finally, Montgomery, who is a change leadership advisor and a social entrepreneur, founder of Civic Health Partners, which is an independent consulting practice that works with purpose-driven organizations in health and technology to improve public engagement strategies and ethics policies. Tara is an executive in residence here at the school and affiliated with the school. So welcome to all of you, and welcome again everyone joining us in person and also those of you joining us online. I want to start, actually, before I start, I just want to highlight and acknowledge the topics that we're discussing of wellness and well-being, and we'll include and discuss issues of mental health. And so if at any point now or across the hour you find this distressing or think it might be distressing, please feel free to step out at any time. And I also want to start by saying a little bit about what we sort of see out there as sort of the state of play or the state of well-being and wellness in the social impact space in particular. And I'm going to draw on some information from research that's been done by the Wellbeing Project and also by My Mind, which I think many of you will be familiar with. We'll talk more about that at the end. What we're seeing, what the research is showing is that employees really across every sector are feeling more vulnerable in terms of their mental health and are reporting being at greater risk for burnout. And partly this is exacerbated by a number of external shocks that we've all lived through and are still living through: COVID, climate change, the current cost of living shock, or these are all amplifying the kinds of mental health crises that we're seeing in the workforce. Many of us are feeling intensifying pressure to perform, to be always on, and sometimes feeling a bit out of control as a result. What does this look like in the social impact space in particular? Well, this is a space where we're tackling complex, uncertain, long-term systemic issues, climate change, inequality, and so on. And in that context, these challenges are often amplified. And the kinds of work that we're doing, the kinds of organizations that we're leading, are facing a number of challenges themselves, and then to do the work of leading and organizing in this space that's very much intensified. And I just want to highlight a few data points from the Wellbeing Project and some other organizations that really show the extent of the stress and the burnout and mental health challenges. So a 2020 study by the Wellbeing Project that looked at social sector change makers found that 75% of respondents felt that looking after their well-being was important. And that's encouraging in many ways, although we might hope it was 100%, but only 25% reported that they were looking after their well-being to a great extent. So a real gap that we see there. A 2019 survey conducted by Unite, which is an organization for people employed by charities and NGOs, found that 80% of respondents mentioned experiencing workplace stress in the past 12 months before the survey was conducted, and 42% said that their job was detrimental to their mental health. So they're quite concerning data. And many times the response that we see, and we see this in the research and writing, survey research, but also deep qualitative and inductive studies with people working in these organizations, a common response is to sort of push through, to try to endure, to use work as a means of coping, as one of my colleagues has looked at. And that in itself can perpetuate some of these challenges and some of the problems. And so now with these data points in mind, I want to turn to the three of you and ask you to reflect on your work and in the context of wellness and well-being. And first to talk a little bit for each of you about, from the perspective of your own work, why is well-being particularly important in this space of social impact?
So I think you mentioned quite rightly, one of the key things when it comes to well-being is this concept, this normalization of toxic activities and even traits, like this whole concept of not sleeping, overworking, to show that you're doing what you should be doing, not just putting your all into everything in that way. And especially the social impact space is also this other additional layer of, okay, it's not just for profit, it's not just another business literally to solve these huge complex problems in the world that you've addressed already. And so this adds an additional layer of pressure, and it just exacerbates these feelings of, okay, now I need to do more, I need to overwork. And in some cases it's like that notion of feeling bad for not doing so. And the concept is that these are problems sometimes that we may not see solutions in our lifetime, but that drive to keep on going is always going to be there. So it becomes this thing where there's a blurred line between work and just life. Like this, if you're passionate about something, you're going to want to read about it, you're going to want to do something. So I think that's why it's very important to consider well-being with regards to like social entrepreneurship and social impacts in general. And especially with my PhD, I researched entrepreneurship and well-being in a digital economy, but I focus particularly on Black female entrepreneurs. Because again, you have to consider the intersectionality of some of these problems, but also the layers. And the concept of intersectionality also helps symbolize this concept of complex situations, because for example, when it came to my PhD and I was doing interviews with methods, a lot of people would identify they didn't actually know when they were burning out, they didn't actually know when they were so stressed to the point where they were potentially going to burn out. And a lot of people in my research, they found that they wanted to also be inspiration to other people just like them too. And that again is that concept of, okay, I have to keep on going. I need to show that I'm strong so that I can show other people that they can do this. But I think one thing that we're hopefully moving towards is this human layer of, okay, you're doing great. It's okay to maybe take a break. It's okay to like not have a perfect day. It's okay to show that you're a bit anxious. It's fine. So I think that's something that I'm really interested in. I'm really interested in the day-to-day well-being, not just the extremes. That I guess that probably when you're growing up in school and stuff, we'll learn about extremes and never really about the day-to-day. So I think that's really important how that accumulates. And as I said, especially in the social impact space, this is a concept of like this big drive, just keep on going.
Really interesting. I just want to reflect for a minute on the themes that were in there that I think are really important. So one is about sometimes there's so much blurring of what we care about for ourselves, and then the goal and the mission of the organization and the broader community that we're trying to serve. And that sort of blurring of boundaries can sometimes be very problematic, right? Exactly. And at the same time, sometimes actually being able to show or tell others around how difficult it is for themselves and blur those boundaries can be quite useful. So this notion, I think, of boundaries, and I'm thinking of my colleague Sally Maitlis, who does a lot of work on this issue of boundaries and mental health in particular. I think it's really important.
Look, I think we find ourselves at a seminal point in history. The metaphorical cement of many societal structures, organizational structures, is now wet. It's malleable for the first time in a long time. We have a lot of opportunities. I think we're at a stage of awareness. We're aware of the problem. I mean, it's now actually start taking some serious action. The fact we're here today having this conversation, I think, is a sign of the times, and I'm really grateful to all of you for being here. So thank you very much for that. In my field of sustainability, there's such passion for the work that people are doing. Passion can be exciting, can motivate, it can also be absolutely exhausting. If I think about the students that I teach, each of them gets so excited about the work that they're doing. They live and breathe it, they go to the pub in the evening and they continue the discussions. I was listening to them recently on the bus on the way back home from our trip to Copenhagen, and they were still going on at that conversation class. That passion is so prevalent in a lot of the work that we do, that it can be exhausting. To build on what you were saying, I think you mentioned things there around this transition away from self-criticism towards self-compassion, and actually saying it's okay to take a break, it's okay to not be okay, normalizing that culture within organizations, having conversations that are actually meaningful and impactful, not just having the one-on-ones talking about what's actually going on in terms of work streams, saying actually how are you doing as a person. In these turbulent, uncertain, novel, ambiguous times we find ourselves in, we need leaders who are actually able to lead people, not just lead a mission, but able to lead people and find congruency between the mission, between the people that they are. They need to be able to delegate work, but actually they need to be able to find what motivates each individual and bring the best out of them. So I think we are at this exciting time. The numbers are quite worrying, as you allude to. And I was reading a report this morning that a third of all people in this space are experiencing moderate mental distress on an ongoing basis, and that's quite a high number. So I think we have the writings on the wall. We've got to do something about it, and that starts with having a conversation. So.
Thank you. Thanks for everyone who came on Friday afternoon and everyone online. I expect you're sharing in some of this sense that our well-being is under assault. Even researchers are feeling it. I want to broaden the definition a bit, though, beyond mental and emotional well-being, to say that physical and social well-being are also under assault. And the social fabric has been deteriorating for years. And that's definitely borne out by the Element Trust Survey, for example. When the social fabric is frayed, it's really hard for individuals to sustain our performance in anything. That sort of social connection that really bolsters us is unstable. And that's a lot of my work. I work on trust building and the impact of mistrust on leaders in social change. And we're really fighting against something that's very hard at the moment. And a lot of us don't feel we're winning. And that has an enormous impact on our well-being in every way. We're dealing with multiple complex crises, which a few of us have already mentioned. But as activists and social impact leaders, those causes are often very personal. We're trying to change things that are part of our own experience, whether we're by inequality or climate issues or racism or LGBTQ assaults, public health crises. So to be able to lead those things while ourselves, frankly, being victims of those things and admitted, that's a big deal. And we have to work on this together. So we can talk about that more later. But one person I want to acknowledge, and I know you mentioned Black women, and that's a community I really want to honor in this space. People like Audre Lorde and Angela Davis have spoken out way before most of us were having this conversation about radical well-being. So radical self-care. And that isn't just candles and bubble baths, right? I mean, I think we all know this by now. It's more profound, and it's about our collective healing. And I hope we can talk a little bit more about that together, and what it means to preserve ourselves so that we're available to do the work.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. I think I did that very nicely. The next question I want to ask all of you, which is about what you've learned from your own work about how we can build resilience and resources to sustain this work, social impact work over the long term.
I think Laurence mentioned a bit earlier, this concept of self-awareness. I think that was also really prominent in my research too, that we've lived through this glorification of overworking and these particular norms to the point where looking after ourselves isn't seen as the norm when it comes to really hard work. So I think that's definitely one of the key areas that that always stands out with my PhD and also with my fellowship project. I was doing entrepreneurship and wellbeing in Nigeria, and I like to really immerse myself when I'm doing research and really just speak to all sorts of people. And it's just really clear that the concept of wellness and well-being is just part always. And I know what I said about the concept of physical health too. So in my PhD, that spoke about a lot of the fact that mental health can seriously affect your physical health, especially due to stress in many cases. And burnout especially is when your body's literally saying to you, I've tried to tell you for so long that you're doing too much, just calm down, rest a bit, you're not listening to me. So now you're going to have to stop for a few weeks, sometimes longer. So I think self-awareness is only something that we can learn from experiences, from collective healing, from talking, from community. I think that's definitely something that's always stuck out to me.
So I'm very big on benchmarking and looking at regions or companies or individuals that are doing things well and learning lessons. There's a region of the world that's doing quite well when it comes to wellness in terms of the impact sector, and those are the Nordic countries: Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, Iceland. Companies in those countries, I took students a few months ago to visit Denmark. We went to Maersk, Novo Nordisk, Carlsberg, and so forth. We heard from their top sustainability leaders as to what they're doing, how they're actually motivating their people to continue that emotional connection to their work. The first thing I'll say is there's very much a culture of openness, of authenticity, of being able to. It's not wearing your heart on your sleeve and telling everyone everything that's going in life. It's something more meaningful than that. It's coming to conversations and saying what's actually going on in your world, and again, not having that conversation just about your work, but being able to actually talk about how you are as a person. I think organizational structures in these countries have built-in systems in place. I mean, it's quite a cliche argument, that's saying that, wellness is not having a yoga afternoon in the workplace, or it's not having, it's more than that. It's being able to turn your out of office on and actually be okay with it. Sometimes when I write to my colleagues in Sweden, you get this funny get out of offices. I've gone to the woods for 6 weeks. Please, everyone, when you get out, when you get back. I should generalize about the United States. But my experience there was, I'm undergoing surgery, I'll be out of the office 4 hours. I think there are some big cultural differences between that. It's actually okay to take summer off and rest and recharge, because that means that you're helping your future self and you're helping the future of the organization taking that break. So I agree with your great critique of hustle culture, that it's not actually a great thing to be getting 2 hours sleep and coming to work and saying, well, I had 2 hours sleep last night, well, I had 1 hour, and that's a competition. I think the third thing that the Nordic countries do very well is they lead for sustainability. They understand that it's a long-term game, and that we actually need to be conserving resources along the way. And that having these, putting paper on a fire is great for about 10 seconds, but then it actually fades away. You've got the heavy logwoods on them. But wooden logs are there to get that it's just sustainable. Interesting.
In my work, I work with high-level leaders, CEOs, board members, but also people on the ground doing the work, and like groups of activists and advocates. I think resources is something we need to talk more about, and lack of resources. And a lot of what we're hearing from Adaku about burnout is about this imbalance between the resources that we have available to do our work and our aspirations, and the pressures that we have, even from our funders as well as from ourselves. I came across a phrase recently, passion exploitation. So I was thinking about you talking about passion. It's useful. There are journal articles, and the Journal of Personality has a good one on this. But I talked to a group I worked with recently and said, have you heard this phrase? And they look so emotional. And this relatability that organizations unintentionally probably take advantage of those of us who care so much about the purpose of what we do, that we are actually being exploited. And it's hard to admit when we're supposed to be advocating for others that we actually need something too. But financial insecurity is very real among social workers in a lot of spaces. And another thing I did before this conversation was I talked to some social impact people about what well-being meant to them. Most of them said fear of not having enough money. And that really hit me. That's real. I've experienced that, to be honest. And a lot of fears, also fear of personal safety. I know people in the past few weeks, this is a trigger warning, people are experiencing death threats in our community. If they work on abortion rights, if they work on queer rights, if they work on misinformation. People like us are experiencing threats that are much bigger than we ever expected we would encounter when we took on this kind of work. So I think we need the resources to support each other and not only to have conversations, but conversations of course matter. But we need to be realistic, and leaders need to be realistic about the commitments they make, not only to their purpose, but to their people.
Thank you. So I want to just sort of summarize, because then I want to ask you sort of a question about what leaders can do to foster these things. So I've heard self-awareness, which I think is absolutely foundational. Then Laurence, you've talked about openness and authenticity, right? So being able to share experiences and not hide, but also to sort of listen and absorb cultural norms, cultural societal norms. And then sort of a framing of the time, right? So playing along, right? Recognizing, it might be fine to push for the deadline and get an hour of sleep, but really we need to pace ourselves for the long game. So, and then finding resources of many kinds. So now I'm going to take that and ask you to think about, what does this mean for leaders in the social impact space? And we titled it Leading Well for a reason, because we really want to understand and unpack what are the ways in which we can help leaders in social impact organizations and across the sector develop techniques and practices for their own well-being, but also foster that across the organizations and the communities that they work with. And so, Laurence, I'm going to start with you. You teach a course on sustainability leadership. Yeah. How do you frame this for your students? You talked a little bit about the experience of taking them on a trip and the experiential learning. What are you framing for your students, and what are the good practices that you see in the sustainability space?
Yeah. What I think about the evidence for leadership, sustainability and leadership and wicked problems, we have two types of leadership, being servant leadership and transformation leadership. Those two very much coupled together. Service in service of a bigger picture, a bigger ideal, and transformation, fundamentally challenging those norms, those taken for granted assumptions about what is and isn't possible. The third dimension that I bring in for students thinking about their own well-being is personal leadership, looking after yourselves. I say to them that you can't effectively lead a group unless you're looking after yourself. It sounds so basic: sleep, diet, exercise. You're making poor cognitive decisions when you're not looking after yourself. You're skipping meals, blood glucose levels going down. You're not actually making good cognitive decisions, so it's jeopardizing your ability to do well. I think the second thing that I try and instill them as leaders really is to give encouragement. Encouragement is so important. A couple of kind words can go such a long way, and they can make people's day. I mean, some accuse the millennials generation of being compliment hungry or needing to have constant reinforcement, but I actually think that's a really, really important thing, and it takes so little effort to say, hey, you did a really good job there, thank you very much, keep it up, you're doing really well. And that little messaging can actually make a huge difference to someone's work and prevent them from burning out. But I think the biggest thing I say to them is that, again, I started with this metaphor of the wet cement, but we really are at this seminal point in history where we have about 10 years to reorient our direction for ourselves and for society in nature. And I don't think that's an overestimate, and we've got to get this right. And the beauty in this wetness of cement is that we can mold things, we can shape things in a new direction. There is a fairer, greener, more prosperous future out there that prioritizes human well-being, combined with the well-being of our planet, and we've got to seize that. We're on the cusp of it. I just think we've got to take that extra step and just grab it both hands. So
I appreciate your optimism.
Thank you. So, Adaku, I want you to next. You're working in a very different context with entrepreneurs in both, again, in the UK and in Nigeria. What does leading well look like in these contexts? I'm thinking particularly smaller startup organizations. What kinds of practices do you find are effective for leaders?
And to answer both those about resources, so entrepreneurship can be really unreliable, and financial stress is definitely a key source of stress and really entrepreneurs. So this is something that we don't really tend to say first when we speak about well-being, but it's the reality. So I think that when I was in my beach there, I spoke a lot about second jobs, how most entrepreneurs, especially when they start, sometimes a job or second, sometimes a third job, and that can lead to exhaustion, burnout, doing a lot of long go. And then when I think that my preaching in the UK and Nigeria, but when I think about what I'm doing in Nigeria, there's this hustle culture that's there, and this has pros and cons. Like there's this kind of this way of being in Nigeria that's like very solution driven. It's very like, okay, we can do that, we can find solutions to anything. But then on the other hand, there's constant non-stop, like, okay, there's lots of problems, we have to find solutions ourselves, there's systems in place that aren't working. So the general persona there is just this kind of just keep on going, but then it means that even I see that whether it's an entrepreneur who hires or an entrepreneurial employee, that just stays there because that's the norm. So I think in terms of leader, well, going to say self-awareness again, then we have to be realistic with what situations are. Not everyone can just take a break as much as they would like to. So I think in the leading up to what would be the most ideal, we need to speak more about like systems and how they help long term, but also think about how community solutions can contribute to the wellness of these societies where they don't have the luxury of just saying, okay, yeah, I'm done too much today, let me just take a break. Because I've seen this, I immerse myself in the Nigerian culture this project, and it's just reality is that people, they don't always have the support to just stop from taking breaks. They have to keep on going. And then interestingly, in my beach, I spoke a lot about, not a lot, but I spoke a little bit about blood pressure, which I'm doing a bit on my postdoc now. And it's like, again, you sort of like don't even think that these things can happen to you or like that. You never have like hypertension at a young age, but the reality is that we're seeing that people aren't checking their health, they're not considering these things, and this thing wouldn't happen to them. But it's not the norm to think about these things per se, like think about prioritize your well-being. So I think it would be ideal with regards to improving wellness in the space or in general, just to think about these things with regards to self-awareness. Like, have I checked my health this month, this week, this year? Have I had enough water today? Sometimes these basic things add up, because it's beginning to learn more about what is your what are your triggers, what makes you stress, what haven't you done, what can you do to help, and they add up. So I mentioned earlier, I'm really interested in day-to-day well-being and how things can accumulate. So I think even if it means starting somewhere, I do think we can make a difference. Absolutely.
Tara, you're working again with different organizations, much larger organizations than Sans Frontières, one that you work closely with, among many others. What do you see in these kinds of organizations, and how do or should they be resourcing and supporting well-being?
A lot of big organizations are talking about well-being. They're also attempting to put resources into well-being. So Médecins Sans Frontières, which Oxford views as an example of the humanitarian sector, has a psychosocial unit which is responsive to mental health needs and when people return from missions in very adverse conditions. It's an extreme example of disasters and emergencies. The unit is there to support them, but I would say in the online communities of MSF workers, they say that that can come too late, and that it isn't a sort of, it's not preventive, it's really responsive, and that in a way medicalizes well-being rather than building it into the way of working. So MSF also has a coaching and mentoring unit, which is growing. I'd say mentoring is a very valuable piece of what they do, and it's not yet at scale, so it's not enough. But mentoring with people who have been survivors, if you like, of this kind of work, have a certain wisdom and shared experience, or you can build trust among someone who's been through what you have. And so I think that's a great model for all kinds of organizations to really lean on others through mentoring. Another big organization I actually was an employee at, Consumer Reports, which is the largest consumer advocacy organization in the world. I think they did a good job through modeling and also through making sure that they had a great business model that had, which meant memberships and subscriptions and revenue that was sustainable. So that there was less insecurity about where's the next grant coming from, where's the next investor coming from. And they were able to make a long-term commitment to people's well-being and kind of integrate it into strategy. What they also did, which a lot of social enterprises don't, is they unionized. And actually that unions allow for this collective action and collective voices around well-being that can help people. And the last thing I'll say is that MSF and other organizations and medical organizations are working on trying to change the identity of being a martyr or a hero. And because that kind of identity in social impact work sets you up for burnout. And that also means finding new language. So MSF, we've been in a conversation, I don't know where it's gone, about not using the word emotion too quickly, because there's a history of macho people going in and being very brave, almost military-like people to rescue people. And when you talk about emotions, they shut down. But if you talk about mood, they don't. So obviously, we hope one day we can talk more openly about emotion, but you don't want to cut people off too quickly. So finding ways to talk about well-being in these organizations is an important step.
Absolutely, I think that's really powerful. I mean, the language and the identity, also more broadly, so what are the accepted ways and what are ways that you can break through barriers, change our language to reach people. It's very, very important. So I wanted, we're going to turn to some questions, but I just want to ask each of you one last question first, which is really sort of, okay, we've talked about why this is important, what you're learning in your work, what does this mean for leading in this sector, what can we in this room do about it ourselves, for our own selves, for the teams and organizations we work with. And so I invite each of you to share one or two key takeaways about where we should start.
And I think we should normalize conversations of day-to-day well-being and speak about how these practices can accumulate positively to prevent rather than cure. I think that's something that I always try to encourage these conversations and just make it known that it's, as I said earlier, it's okay not to be okay. It's okay to not have a perfect day. It's okay to just be human. So I think the more this becomes the reality and normalized, then it'll be better long term.
Absolutely agree with your sentiments. I think it's a matter of each of us, realizing that we are a stone in the pond and sending out those ripples and actually practicing what we are preaching. And if we're telling people that it's okay to actually be present in a meeting and not have to be on your emails all the time thinking about what's coming next, then we should actually be doing that ourselves. If we're saying that the weekends are a protected time and that you're not expected to work on Sundays, then we should probably be not responding to emails on Sunday and making people actually become part of that. I know I'm very, very guilty of doing that myself, but I think it's about leading by example. I do believe that when we get enough momentum here, we're actually going to get to the tip of the mountain and things are going to swing very quickly. That's always how it works with social movements. I think we are, I am a bit of an optimist. I think we can actually pull this off. And again, I do see companies and countries that actually do this quite well, but they're far from perfect. Doing pretty well, and again, I like to look at these countries that are doing quite well the lessons and say, obviously you can't transport a culture, but there are some systematic, practical steps you can actually do to take these things out and plug them into organisations. I think Oxford is doing fairly well. I think we have a way to go. I think it is a high performance culture, and I think the expectation is that you will work. It's a sort of all-encompassing life. Many people live in college accommodation and have the middles, and so the whole university kind of consumes you in a way. But I think there are people in corners of this university who feel very exhausted trying to keep up with the race. And I think if all of us can collectively just say, hey, let's just take a breather, we're all having the same troubles here, that's actually okay, then I think we'll have a bright future ahead of us.
So one or two things. One might be for leaders as strategists to think about people and their sustainability strategy, and not just think sustainability of the planet or of their profits, sustainability of the people who do the work. Build that into the heart of your strategy. The second is for leaders and all of us not to think of well-being as an individual problem. It's a collective, complex problem. And as such, like all the systems change we do in this community, it means dealing with it together. And it means speaking up at the policy level to set up the conditions for it to be possible to have well-being. And so it's not to negate the individual things we can do to take care of ourselves, but let's use our leaders to elevate that conversation.
Fine, thank you. Really, I think it's spanning from the day-to-day up to the structural macro systems. So I'm going to open it up now. Questions from any of you in the room or any of you joining online? Yeah.
Hello. So we in the university find probably the hardest people to reach are academics and researchers for obvious reasons. But how do you convince those people that their well-being is important? How do you go about that when they are too busy being passionate, being, getting the next research grant, getting the next funding bit, and just being the best because we're Oxford? How do you actually convince them?
What a superb question. And I think academics respond well to the evidence. Show them the evidence. You say, here's a paper that shows people who are neglecting their well-being experience burnout after 2.5 years. Have a look at that and realise that we want you to not just thrive in the short term, we want you to thrive in the long term. So framing the conversation around that, normalising that it's actually okay to take some time out to come to a wellbeing seminar, to fill out a survey that's acceptable. I mean, it's tough in this place because you feel like you're constantly in competition with, not necessarily with one another, but you're in competition with the system. You're trying to keep up and trying to get your next thing out. So I think it's a cultural change, and it's not an easy thing to do. And any cultural change takes a lot of time, energy, and effort. I'm going to ponder on that a little bit longer, but my wonderful colleagues jump in. So.
Interesting. I think it might be really good to use that creativity and the arts to try and share these important messages. So as part of my fellowship, I started creating a documentary with on entrepreneurship and well-being in Nigeria. And I went to this film festival too last November in Lagos. And they just reminded, I'm not as a film background, but it reminds me that film and media and even music can literally, there can be one movie you watch and it changes your perspective on things. So I think it'll be interesting to use media and the arts more to whether it's just creating a film or whether it's a documentary or just a film that shares this important message. It's a unique way. People love to watch things, even academics, they'll have maybe 1 hour at some point with them, or 10 minutes where they can watch a quick film and learn something. And to me, there's been certain things in my lifetime, it'll be one sentence or one song or something that just sticks with me. And I think it's a good way to, place to explore.
I love that. I want to do it. I'm not Jewish, but there are some ideas in Judaism that I think are relevant. And so there's this concept of healing, repairing the world. And there's a rabbi who wrote something that says, I've written it down here, it is not up to you to finish the time, but at the same time, you're not free to avoid it. So what it's really saying is, yes, be passionate, be ambitious, and you don't have to do everything. You don't have to do it all by yourself. And I really see it in the academic community. I have to finish the longest book. I have to do all this research I've never done. It's okay to do just your piece and to carve out a piece that is meaningful and realistic. That's your contribution. That's your legacy. That is enough. And I think to learn that individually we can do enough and we are enough is something that I hope more academics internalize rather than feeling that their calling is beyond that.
Thank you.
I have a question specifically for Adaku actually, or anyone else. But I wanted to just dig in a little bit in what you initially said around intersectionality, and I think that's such a crucial element when we talk about wellness and health, especially in the social impact sector. And what you said actually around thinking about financial insecurity and sometimes well-being and just knowing that you can provide for your family at the end of the month. And I wonder if you had observed or seen something in the evidence around strategies specifically in the rural South, where communities were able to support each other. I'm doing some research in Pakistan where we experiment a little bit of mindfulness, and I wonder what the equivalent is, and especially in other countries where it's more of a low resource setting. You know, what can people be doing? Is it talking groups? Is it for Sunday church service? What is it that you've observed that's helping people, supporting people, making them feel seen and in their struggle? Because it can't stop working, but at least they know that they're seen.
Definitely, the person that came to mind is Stonewall Forum. Was this social enterprise, and it's, I can't remember the name, but it was when they get grandmas in the community train them well. Yeah, and then they get people to speak to the grandmas. I thought that stood out. I was trying to remember the name now. But I think in that sense, social enterprise, like people taking that stance to try to have a solution, although there needs to be that balance of not burning out. But I think that's where I'm seeing like key changes actually happening. Like it's not just sort of like going on and just like waiting for it to come. Like, people actually saying, okay, we need to do something about this. We're going to get the news together in this way. And I mentioned media already. I think media, especially at the African continent, media is what can help in so many different unique ways. Like film, like people put in, sometimes I'll go into academic example, like people don't actually know what their triggers are, so they don't know when they're burning out, don't know when they're getting stressed. But sometimes you just watch something, you see yourself in that person, or you mentioned earlier, people heard about a term and just like got so emotional because I'm like, wow, that's me. You suddenly just need that moment to be like, oh, okay, well, I didn't realize that you take this more seriously. So I think yeah, from what I've seen in Nigeria so far, and in this example of Stonewall Forum, it's like this concept of using the community in that way. So whether that's acknowledging that the country or the continent love something like music or film, and using that to sort of like give them back the information they need to change their lives.
Anything you want to?
Not for me, sorry.
It's a little. So we didn't talk that much about resilience per se, but there's an amazing book by Rebecca Solnit, Paradise of the Gates of Hell. Examples from emergencies and crises around the world to talk about how communities come together under that kind of duress. And actually, you don't need authority figures to descend and save you, that you actually self-organize and feel a surprising sense of belonging and energy from that. And that doesn't just relate to the global South, but I think it is a portion of resilience, this sense of collective efficacy and belonging. And that's in some of these models like Spark that are really about Googling around collective resilience. And I think we find some of the answers in that work.
Other questions? Yeah.
Hello, I'm Sanya. Thank you so much. I speak as someone who's a practitioner in this space and solving these problems from a tech side. So I have two questions. One is what you mentioned about the taking advantage of people's passion. There is two sides of that I'd like to just put to the panel. One is in terms of age. So the younger generations that come into these sectors, in terms of financial instability, very short contracts, associate, consultant, intern, like there's this whole sort of culture around how payments and how care is done in that level. Is that something that you've observed? How can that be shifted? That's one, which is more on the organizational side. Second, there's also trauma is really interesting, right? That with the pain you feel, you want the other person to feel sometimes. So there's this thing of it's hard, kid, get over it. You have to get on with it kind of mentality with legacy people within the industry. And also as you grow, maybe the sort of journey that an individual goes on in going to that top level within change leadership, the willingness and openness to share the costs, internal costs, reputation costs that come with actually driving change is often different. The depth of that isn't the same, even when we're having conversations within our industry, and the purpose of those conversations is open that box. So in this sort of two sides of the coin of the organizational, but also on the individual, is this something you've observed? How can it be addressed? And any experience around the same?
What was the purpose of the question? It deserves a good answer. Give me a second to I think, to your second point, we actually haven't spoken that much today about resilience at the individual level, as you allude to. And the reality is that this is tough. This is not supposed to be a walk in the park, and life is difficult. And the work that we do is very difficult. And it's not a matter of telling people to toughen up, but we do have to have psychological resilience and realize that we have, we are a lot stronger than we actually think we are. And we gain, just as when we go to the gym and we tear muscle fibers, the muscle grows back stronger. When we overcome adversity in tough times, we actually do become, in most cases, stronger beings. And I really believe in that. And I think a healthy organization is one that's able to do that and not take it to the extreme. There's psychological safety in the sense that you can fail, you can fumble, you can make mistakes, you can fall on your face, but the organization will have some pillows there to catch you at certain points. The dangerous organization is ones where you can really fall into a state of despair and there's nothing there to actually, there's no safety net there to actually catch you. So I think it's a fine line between getting the right balance between having healthy levels of failure and accepting that this is not supposed to be easy or particularly comfortable, but also not taking that to the extreme and doing so by having good organizational structures in place. So a bit of a rambling response to a question. Hope that enlightens someone. Do you want to, Tara?
Okay. Something that came to my mind when you were asking questions. When I was in Lagos, I met with some academics in the entrepreneurship space, and they work on certain entrepreneurship. They don't use the term entrepreneurship. They said that all entrepreneurs have a social, like a drive to be social, to solve problems that change the world for better. So even when you're talking about contracts, and I remember what Tara said about sustainable business models, it's like this interplay between, okay, we want to do good, but we need to live, we need to have rights to live and have something coming in to be able to be healthy in that sense. But I think it's one of these things where I think the world as a whole needs to see social good as the norm again. Like it needs to be something where it's not just a small set of people that are doing it. Just remember the climate change. People, for the most part, they don't realize, some people don't realize the importance of the collective effort that's needed to make a change. So they sort of ignore it until the time where it's like, okay, well, this is getting serious now. And like, so in New York the other day, there's like orange because of the wildfire in Canada. It's like things happen, and then people have that sort of like remembering, oh gosh, we need to actually do something. So I think again, it kind of so a lot about conversations in communities, about actually having these conversations that drive people to make changes and think about it. And I think that normalization means that longer down the line, this is not just a small set of people that are going to be working and making the world a better place. It's going to be integrated into even the most random limited profit businesses. It has to be even honestly level. We have to do something about all of these problems that we have in the world. It can't just be small set of people.
So a small corner of the question, which was about more senior leaders. They haven't culturally had much permission to talk publicly or even to their boards, funders, investors about how they may have suffered getting to the top or how they might be suffering now. And we're seeing a bit of modeling of that now, mostly for women leaders. But I want boards, and I work on and with boards, they need to give a much longer view and a lot more leeway to listen to leaders coming to them and saying, I'm uncertain, I'm stuck, I'm tired. Because they're not allowed to say those things in those spaces. But that's going to perpetuate the problem. But we need to, again, do it together. If everyone starts to say it, then you're going to be less vulnerable. And I encourage that culture change.
I just want to pick up on your point, Tara. One of my colleagues, Sally Maitlis, here at the business school, who I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of work on this issue of mental health among senior leaders across a variety of sectors. And what you said very much resonates with some of her findings around the ways in which this is not discussed, it's not seen as appropriate to be open, to be authentic. And that actually creates a quite a vicious cycle of both for the individual and the organization of maintaining this unhealthy boundary, which is detrimental to the self and actually influences the way you lead and the extent to which you can actually help the people you work with and the organization accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. Really critical to break that. Yes.
Just to add to that, Sally's videos on YouTube, where she does a number of talks about just that, I agree with her. And also strengthen as well. They're not brand new, but they're absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
What's my question? I was just thinking about what you just said because that completely resonates with me as a manager for many, many years and now a leader. I think there is this culture around we're taught how to help others, but we're not supposed to be very human ourselves and feel those things. So I completely agree with that. Completely different question. I want to ask about organisational well-being, and Charlie, you spoke about this a little bit earlier, about how a lot of organisations approach well-being on a reactive basis rather than a proactive basis. It's quite a big question, but are there one or two things that you see over and over again where organisations are making errors when approaching a well-being strategy? And are there one or two points where they've done it very well? What are they?
I think we'll all have something to say about this. It's much easier to say the mistakes. So MSF on a bulletin board, public. One of the people said, if they tell me to meditate one more time, I'll like do something violent. So I think that speaks for a lot of us, thinking, oh, there's a lot of good intentions. And it's not that you shouldn't say, here's some resources for meditation, but it's got to be more. I think a good example is a lot of nonprofits, or maybe not a lot, a growing number are providing big paid sabbaticals. And that's the example of something that's sort of authentic and meaningful. And of course, academia has sabbaticals, but you're supposed to be super productive in them. This is supposed to possibly be a recuperative sabbatical. So I think organizations that are doing that, the North Star Fund in the US is doing it, a group called IOB, that's microfinance. I know people that have taken these sabbaticals and it helps exactly do what we want, which is to sustain them and sustain their commitment to these organizations. So it feels like an expensive gift, but it's actually really important. That's what I can give. I don't know if others have something.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right in terms of this congruency between actions and words. And we see this phenomenon now of kind of like outsourcing wellness, saying we've got this great 100 number you can call 24 hours a day and someone will be there to support you. I mean, that's all great. But as you say with your example, it's like, well, if there's nothing, serious in place, it doesn't really make a difference. What I've seen in the research that I've done is the most powerful thing can be meaningful one-on-one meetings frequently with managers, and half of that conversation is about work and the other half is about how you as a person are doing. And we have enough people, of course, when you get to the very top, who has the one-on-one with the vice chancellor and says that, how are you doing this week? But I think there's enough layers of management that if we all do that and we all do it properly and thoroughly and consistently, then it's actually going to work. It's actually going to work fairly well.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's this, I've seen this on LinkedIn recently. I think it's called Wellbeing washing, where it's like, yeah, we see these kind of meditation, yoga and stuff, but I think what they're saying what Tara said, just having some sort of action in place where you're sort of thinking about the underlying issue. And sometimes it's like across all different types of companies, it's like somewhat the same thing. People appreciate it sometimes. So I feel like the one-to-ones definitely would make a difference. I think not just sort of like surface level things, but trying to get to understand the depth. And I guess bringing research, and I think having these like anonymous surveys and research can help to understand the broader level across the board of the organisation. There's I've done a lot of research in occupational health, and for the most part, depending on the different sectors, but still across the different sectors, there are similar issues that are reoccurring. So by these organizations sort of addressing them, it does help and to the overall world.
It's really helpful. Thank you.
Yes. I love the idea of the sabbatical. I guess my question is, would it be better for our well-being if we all just work for a lot less? And what do you think about the 4-day work week?
I don't think the 4-day work week will ever take off. Sorry to be cynical. I think there's always going to be a group of people that are going to want to do more. If you look at the personality trait of conscientiousness, some people who are very high in that trait, the hardest thing for them is to have a day where they're not being productive. You know, they think a 0 day when nothing happens, that's a very, very difficult thing to do. So I don't think it'll ever work personally. I know that's a big call, but there's been some examples of it working quite well. But I think that there's always going to be that group that will push up and it's hard. So.
And also, I think it's like this concept of smart work. And so it's like you can work throughout the day or work in a way that's productive, but also you have time for yourself. Like I always say, like integrate something you love into your day-to-day life. That's one of the things I even said in my PhD. My PhD, I had a whole chapter dedicated to how to improve your entrepreneurial well-being. And during my Bible, they're like, oh, why did you do that? That's not traditional academia. And I said, because I wanted to help the people I was research. One of the things I feel like, yeah, I guess this concept of smart work, because I guess that's more so flexible in that sense. It might be working less, but working more intentional, where you have time to also integrate things you learn into your day, and that automatically boosts your well-being. So there might be some conversations around that.
Can I be rude there and interrupt before Tara goes? I mean, I think you're absolutely spot on there, and this kind of busy work, and there's this thing where sometimes people don't feel that actually, you know, the whole day can be occupied with meetings, with responding to emails, and you get to 5 o'clock at night and you feel like you've done no work, because you've been talking about work the whole day. And I think actually acknowledging that going to a meeting is actually doing work, and you're allowed to be present in the meeting. It's not a luxury item to be present and have your phone off. So I think it's about, but as you say, it's about making it count and actually using those periods of time well, so working smarter and harder.
I mean, I love the sound of a 4-day work week. I'm not going to argue against it, but I think there are other things that we can do first. And one is to manage our own boundaries, where I don't often say there are individual things, but saying no to meetings and saying no, I don't show up for things on a Friday if you have that autonomy, which a lot of people don't. But where you do, use it. And try and change the culture. And then that will normalize less time working. And we know ourselves, we know what's productive. So trust ourselves, trust each other, and also take some responsibility not to waste other people's time, which I do. I like fire something off just to kick it into the other port. So some self-awareness about other people's time, I think, will also help. And then maybe we'll land somewhere closer to a 4-day work week in how we feel.
Excellent, thank you. I think that's a good place to stop, although not fully stop, because we're going to go on to a reception. Thank you all very much for a really interesting, enlightening, and important discussion. I want to close with 2 follow-ups, acknowledging the very important points you just made about well-being washing, and you know, something like a meditation room is not the solution. I just want to alert you all to some resources and events that are going on. Monday is the launch of Thriving at Oxford, which is a 2-week well-being event series for all staff at the university. And it's kicking off with a keynote from the Vice Chancellor and a talk from one of our colleagues here at the Business School, Professor Jan Deneb, on well-being at work, insights from the world's largest study on employee well-being. So I encourage you all to attend that. And I also want to flag that Henry Majid, who is a School Center visiting fellow and the founder of My Mind, has offered free access to My Mind for anyone who's here today. So I encourage you to take advantage of that if you're not already on My Mind. You can email support@mymind.co.uk. So again, thank you all. Thank you for coming and engaging, those of you here in the room and those of you on Zoom. Thank you for joining us in that format. Please stay now for a celebratory reception. This is our final Insights for Action seminar of the year. And we want to celebrate the year of seminars, but also to celebrate our outgoing early career fellows. There are 2 of them who are here with us today, Dr. Laurence. And we encourage you to join us again in the fall when we'll be starting. Thank you.